So I've been putting another build together. This is another one of the full unique builds that I'm kind of working on. Definitely noticing a challenge with these, which is you can either get damage or you can stack defense, but you can't really get both. And it's not really apparent when you're setting it up until you start doing rare red maps. So I thought it would be an interesting time to do 3 different map tiers. We're going to do blank scoured 5, 10, and 16. And then we're going to do a rare 5, 10, and 16. I kind of want to show the difference. This character has been able to clear rare 16s pretty consistently. Again, it's 100% rares, and I'll kind of walk through the build later. But wanted to start with a bit of a showcase of what it looks like playing the game, and then what you're able to accomplish with a fully unique build. Just to show, the scarabs I'm using for this are not perfect, but I'm going to be running just an atlas for more ore and scarabs. So I have 2 ore scarabs here, I have 2 magic pack scarabs, and then I have this. just finished doing the recording of those 6, maybe 7 maps. I think I miscounted, or I ran the wrong map at some point, so I added an extra one in there. Got some cool drops, got a divine drop, which was fun, considering I was only doing 2 T16 maps. We ran 2 T5 dunes, and then we ran 2 T10 mud geyser, and then we ran 2 T16 dunes, just because that's the map that I have scried from Defiled Cathedral. But actually just want to run through the build now really quickly, just to kind of show you the gear I have. I'll show you the tree I have. There's tons of area for improvement, and hopefully, you know, someone can look at this and get some ideas for it. But nothing on this build is incredibly expensive, except for one of the jewels, and you can make it yourself. And it doesn't have to be like the jewel that I have. You can roll your own jewels, you can fracture your own jewels, you can take any build that uses golems and spend a fortune crafting it better than this. One of the cool things is that this build's actually using 2 of the new uniques from this patch. One of them is exclusive, actually they're both exclusive to this, and I'll be curious to see if they add these belts into the main game, but who knows. So I'm an elementalist, which means that I'm stacking golems for extra damage. I'll show the jewel that buffs that. That's why you have a total of 16 golems here. You have the chaos one, stone golem, lightning, fire, and ice. Basically you're getting accuracy and crit, extra damage, attack speed, and mana regen. You're getting life regen and defenses here with stone golem. The chaos one gives you chaos res and damage over time. And then we're using 11 carrying golem of the hordes. Golem of the hordes means you can have 3 of this golem instead of 1. I'm actually linking it with, don't remember where I'm linking it here. Nope, where are you? There we go. Carrying golem of the hordes here, and I'm linking it with one of the new jewels, congregation, which means we get 38% more maximum number of golems. So I'm getting even more extra golems just from having this jewel here. So we have 16. I have not put any primordial jewels on here. If I wanted to invest more in this character, I could. Again, I'll show you jewels in a second, but there's a lot of ways that you could improve on this build to make it substantially stronger. I just don't want to, because it's a all unique build. It's always going to be weaker than mixing in rares into the build in various places. These are more just concept builds for you to look at. But again, okay, so we're building golems, we're maximizing those. We can only summon golems, so you're trying to get as many golems as you possibly can, and then you wear the Dark Monarch helm, where you can summon twice as many golems, which is why we can have 16 instead of 8. But then again, you can only summon golems, so if you want stuff like animate guardians or specters, you won't be able to do that when you're wearing this helm. The bow is a new bow. It's a Foulborn version of the new bow. I have the other new bow here, I think, yep, here. So this is the non-Foulborn. The mod that changes is fire damage, so if you wanted to go for maybe an attack-based version of this build, also doable. Maybe something like a burning arrow that doesn't do fire damage over time, I guess. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. Anyway, this is the normal version of the bow. It's pretty cool. The 5 Cinder Flames is basically when you get 5 stacks on an enemy, it reduces their fire resistance. Elementalist reduces fire resistance. Cleric Devastation puts ash on enemies. So what we're doing is we're stacking a bunch of sources of minus fire res, whether it's through exposure or whether it's through ash like this ring here and the Elementalist. You can also apply a curse, which I don't even have set up here. Again, I wasn't investing in this too much. I thought it was pretty cool. It's somewhat solid for a unique only build, so just kind of looking at what you can do here. And what we're doing as a skill is we're using Conflagration. So essentially this shoots these things in the air, and then when you walk on them, they explode. So you can shoot a bunch here, you can blink arrow into them, and then it can all explode here. Maybe there's a way to automate that. Probably there is, actually. here all sorts of helms that cast a lightning warp in there, so you can cast a ton of these and shoot a ton of these arrows into the ground, and then lightning warp into the middle of them, and they'll explode. Probably actually do something really cool with that. The skill does have limitations though, because most skills shoot out straight. This one you have to shoot where you're running, and then make sure you actually run into them. It's cool. It's a fun skill, and I was able to get a really cheap one of these with Mirage Archer for something like 1 divine. Again, I think it's a really cool skill. It does a lot of base fire damage, really good for ignite as well, because the explosion that you run into does 80% more damage. And you can have a maximum of 20 stuck arrows in the ground. But all in all, really, really cool skill gem here. We're linking it up with elemental damage with attacks, empower, burning damage, swift affliction, and deadly ailment. So this is pretty standard for anything doing damage over time. And that's the skill that you just saw clear all the maps here. Really focusing on the ignite proliferation here. And again, I'll show you the passive tree in a second, but we did take Shaper of Flames just because of the way that works. Even though we're only doing fire damage, it's really defensive. So we tried to mix damage and defenses on this build. But essentially, the Barracks Respite Ring, when I ignite an enemy, it inflicts an equivalent ignite on nearby enemies. So it's a way of proliferating the ignite through big packs of enemies. As the enemies get ignited and die, my belt, the Gloom Shrine and Impenetrable Shrine, just further prolifs. So essentially, I'm igniting an enemy or a few enemies. They'll die and explode. The explode also ignites because of Shaper of Flames. So that's why so many packs are just kind of exploding everywhere. And then the third kind of explosion that we have is through the boots. I wanted to add another ailment type, which is Scorch. So I use the Legacy of Fury boots. I think people with RF use these to get a bit more or a bit better clear. But essentially, Scorch reduces resistances even further. And then when you kill the Scorched enemies, it does another ignite based on enemy life. So there's the 3 sources of explosions that you'd be seeing as we're running around. The reason I wanted to get Scorch is actually because I was using the Taming earlier, and just to get some more damage, but then I realized I could do the traditional ignite setup, which is having the Polaric Devastation Ring in the left for Ash, and then using Barracks Respite for Ignite Prolif. So it's not as necessary later, but I think it works out pretty well. The quiver I'll show. This is not the best quiver. I wasn't sure which unique quiver to use with this build. This has Chaos Res, Life, and Attack Speed. It adds a little extra damage. Fizz, Chaos, and then the Smoke Cloud I thought would be a little bit defensive. I don't know that it ever really triggers, and I never really notice it. When this character dies, it tends to be in one hit. The damage with hits and ailments doesn't really matter because I don't have a way of blinding enemies. If you find a way, there might be a cluster duel you could do, or maybe a different ring. You could get 47% more damage with your ailments through this quiver as well. Forward defensive, we have 2 options. We have 2 items rather. One of them is Cloak of Flames. Gives a ton of fire resistance, and it converts 40% of physical damage to be taken as fire damage. So we don't have any armor on this build. This is also why when it gets hit, sometimes it just dies in one hit. It's because there's no armor. So what this is doing is saying every time you take a hit, that's a physical hit. So maybe you're getting hit by an arrow. 40% of that damage is being taken as fire damage. And what you can see from this is that we have 79% fire res, which is really nice. I'm not going to do the math because I'm special right now and it's very early and I can't think right, but that's better than having very little armor, again, which we have here. What is the other defensive layer? The other one is Defiance of Destiny. So I actually found this Defiance of Destiny. It was really cheap. Everyone is trying to corrupt these and get the 24% missing life unreserved, or missing unreserved life before being hit by an enemy. mod on it, and so you can find a lot of these 17-18% Defiance of Destinies because they're low rolled and people don't really want them, and then you can get them pretty cheaply. I could keep trying to corrupt it, get a better life and mana modifier, but 20% is fine by me. Gives me life, gives me a bunch of resistances, which again is always hard to do on these unique only builds. This is cool. So anytime I get hit, it just gives me that chunk of life before it calculates the damage and actually takes it away from my life. So it's pretty cool to have. I definitely notice a huge difference when I'm wearing this versus when I had a more aggressive amulet on. I just hate dying all the time. I like Prolif characters. I like characters that do damage, but if they're falling over all the time, it's just not fun to play. I think I have an example of one of those that I'm actually going to show for one of these unique only builds. It's definitely not going to be anything new that people haven't seen, but I think we're doing something with wands that's also a full unique. That'll be an example of a ton of damage, but absolutely no tankiness. The last item here is really interesting. So I don't really use these gloves with much, but I had extra reservation, mana reservation here, so I put on Venomous' Weave. What this does is it gives you access to Aspect of the Spider, which is another aura you can cast, and essentially it adds spider webs to enemies. The spider webs hinder enemies, which means they're slow, so it's an indirect defensive layer, and when enemies have 3 or more webs on them, your damage with hits and ailments is 57% increased. So the gloves give life, the gloves give attack speed. It adds a little bit more chaos damage as well, which is always good because it means your ignites are going to be bigger, again because of Shaper of Flames on the tree. But it's just a little bit additional damage. The damage for this build is not the highest, which is why I'm not showing any bosses with it. I was doing one of the, what's his name, Searing Exarch on this, and it was just too slow, so I pulled in another character to finish it. But yeah, the fire damage per second is, the tooltip at least, is 165. That's before all the minus fire reses and fire exposures. I think it goes to like 350, 400 for this build in POB. Let me think if there's anything else. Auras, we're using Purity of Elements so that we get more elemental resistances, and we're also immune to all ailments, which is really important. Using that on every unique build, I think, right now, just to, again, because you can't use rares to fix little gearing problems like that. Blink Arrow, showed the golems, showed that. Golems are up here. I am using Flesh and Stone now. Okay, cool. So for more physical mitigation, I'm using Arctic Armor. So it's taking physical damage. It's reducing physical damage that you take while you're standing still, because I'm always standing still shooting my bow. It's always reducing the physical damage, or almost always, which is really cool. The immunity to freeze isn't relevant because I have Purity of Elements. And I'm also using Flesh and Stone. So what you'll see is this aura around me here. When enemies are in that aura, they do less damage to me. They do 19% less damage, which is kind of cool. Apart from that, I guess the last part about the gear is that this bow, you'll notice, has 6 sockets on it, and none of the sockets are linked. The reason for that, and I'll go through the tree now, is because of this. So Runegraph to the Jeweler means that I do 10% increased damage for each unlinked socket in an equipped 2-handed weapon. So I have 6 sockets, none of them are linked, so I'm doing 60% more damage. I was trying to find as many ways to improve damage as I could on this character, again, just because it was low. To solve mana issues, because the mana for this is quite high, I actually ended up passing over to Eldritch Battery. That's why I can almost just perpetually cast this, and my mana doesn't really do anything, because it's using the energy shield that I have from the gear, from the helm, from the cloak, and I don't know, whatever else is giving me energy shield. Oh yeah, the cloak, the helm, and then the belt, the impenetrable shrine on that gives me additional energy shield. But yeah, going back to the tree, We're increasing the number of golems we can have and the buffs we get from the golems. We've taken a bunch of life recoup. I think I had more of these earlier. We were just trying to get as defensive as possible because it was getting hit and just knocked over too much that it wasn't even fun to play. Have more life regen here and increase life regen rate, and then just some life. We've come all the way down on the tree to get unwavering stance so we can't be stunned. And then we're grabbing some of these nodes just to increase the amount of maximum res that we can have, which is why our fire res goes all the way up to 79%. The rest of them are 77, so it's a little bit better than normal. We're also corrupted blood immune, and normally you can get that on a jewel. You can get it on a really good jewel, but it's going to cost a fortune, or you can just get the corrupted blood mod on a corrupted jewel implicit and just put a piece of trash somewhere in the tree. Again, I don't have too many sockets, but I do have sockets that I could have put primordial jewels in here and here and here. So if I get more levels, I would have 4 sockets, but you have access to a bunch of close sockets for 2 points. There's one there, there, and you can get another one there. So you really do have access to a lot of sockets if you really want to min-max this. And to solve any gearing issues, because my dexterity is really low, I'm actually using an elegant hubris jewel with Caspero so that I can get supreme ostentation. What that means is that I don't care about gearing requirements. This also affects jewels, so you'll see all of my jewels here, because there's a lot of dex ones need dexterity that I just don't have. I don't have to worry about that. That also means I lose any bonuses for having life here, so I lose something like 100 life, and I lose mana, and if I had dexterity it would be accuracy and evasion, but again, I don't really care too much. And then looking at the ascendancy, the choices I chose for this build are the golems, of course, so we can have more golems. Also, being immune to elemental damage seems to be most of the reasons why golems die. I know they can't make those permanent for all golems, but this node is great for 2 reasons, or for 1 reason really, and it's because it resummons the golems after they die. So instead of having to stop every time a golem dies, it just automatically gets resummoned. I really wish there was a jewel or some way to resummon them and function more like Path of Exile 2 does, where minions are automatically resummoned when they die after a period of time. But I'm also using Bastion of Elements, so I'm elemental reflect immune. So if I'm attacking enemies that reflect elemental damage, I'm actually immune to that. I also get Primal Aegis, so I get something like 1800 elemental damage is just blocked by this, which is really nice, so it's another defensive tool. Shaper of Flames is great with any Ignite build. You don't have to worry about stacking Ignite chance because all of your damage always ignites, or sorry, all of your hits always ignite, and then all damage you do ignites. What that means is if I'm doing only lightning damage, as an example, I can take this node and my lightning damage will be calculated to see how much ignite damage I actually do as well. The last thing here is really useful because it pairs very well with the cloak. So my cloak, as I showed earlier, physical damage is taken as fire, but with this, physical damage is also taken as fire. So enemies ignited by you, I'm igniting all enemies, so all enemies have 40% of the physical damage that they do to me converted to fire. So far that's 80%. And that with Arctic Armor, I'm not sure how the calculation works. I don't know if that means that with the 21% less physical damage taken, I don't think those two stack. I think these two are separate mods. So essentially, I'm having the physical damage that I take reduced by Arctic Armor, and then I'm having the rest of the physical damage that I take, 80% of it is taken as fire damage, and therefore is reduced by 79%. The last node I took was Mastermind of Discord. This means that anytime I inflict exposure, it's reducing it by an additional 25%. Heart of Destruction, huge damage. If you want more damage, you can get rid of probably Bastion of Elements and take that. You'll do 30% more elemental damage when you're hitting unique enemies, which is nice. And when you're not hitting unique enemies, you have 60% more AoE. What that means is your Gloom Shrine explodes will be bigger, your boot explodes will be bigger, and the radius of the conflagration explosions will be bigger as well. think the last thing to show is the timeless jewels. So I'll show that one last. For really standard large cluster jewel here, so it's on a fire base, doing burning bright, so increases burning damage and AoE. This one increases elemental damage and all elemental resistances, and then widespread destruction gives more elemental damage and even more AoE. So AoE is great. We want our explodes to be big so that we can clear big packs of enemies, so that our prolifs increase as our gloom shrines explode. We ignite more enemies, and it's just really good for clear. This is a unique jewel that you won't be able to find in any other league probably, and only exists because of one of the consumables that I can never remember the name of. It's like a refracting something or other, refracting mist, I think. Basically what it does is it lets you take a jewel like this. So this one, the fire jewel node, lets you roll elemental things like burning bright, prismatic heart, and widespread destruction. It lets you, God, how do you explain this? So these large cluster jewels here, this is a fire jewel, which means it can roll fire mods, basically. What a refracting mist does is it actually changes the base type of the item. So what I did is I started with a large cluster jewel that was doing increased minion damage. I rolled Primordial Bond, which is a minion gem exclusive mod. I then fractured that with a fracturing orb, and then I started using a refracting mist on this timeless jewel until it rolled elemental damage. You can also do this, you can keep rolling it to get whatever you want. But a refracting mist costs about 1 divine each, so it gets expensive really quickly, and I didn't want to do it too long, so I settled for elemental damage instead of something like fire damage, which is just a slight improvement anyway. This gem actually worked out to be really good. It gives me a lot of all res, gives me increased effect, and it gives me 12 slots, and the only thing I really wanted here was this node. So this is why when you're stacking golems, you want to have as many golems as possible, and you want to get as many primordial bonds as possible. Normally, when you're getting this timeless jewel, you're getting increased minion damage for all of the points here. But because we can use a refracting mist, all of these points are actually useful instead of being wasted and just crap, which is why you use a refracting mist on this. Because you want to increase elemental damage instead of having all these nodes increase minion damage, which doesn't scale your damage at all, unless you get this. But we weren't doing that for this build. We're already, point starved as usual. Okay, cool. So I think we've covered everything with the build, covered the ascendancy, covered the tree pathing. Actually really happy. This is probably the best unique only build that I've played. I've been trying to roll a bunch of them recently. If they feel like crap, I'm just not posting a video on it. If they're falling over and dying all the time and can't clear anything, not posting a video on that either. I'm working on something else right now, which is another dot build, another Prolif build, but it's not Ignite. It's actually focusing on poison. So stay tuned and I'll go through that. And yeah, this has been fun. So I'll keep posting unique only builds for a little bit just to give some newer players some new ideas on things they can do using unique only. These tend to be a lot cheaper. Nothing on this build is overly expensive. I think the most expensive thing is actually this cluster jewel. Which, to be fair, is expensive. If you can't roll this, fine. Just use a minion damage jewel, get Primordial Bond, and then path your way around the tree to get Spiritual Aid. That way, all these little things that would give you increased minion damage will actually matter for your damage as well. Yeah, okay, I think we're good. Thanks for watching this. Hopefully this is helpful. Let me know what ideas you have, or if there's any build ideas that you'd like to see. Thanks.